In a large, bustling city where life moved at a frantic pace, tensions between the police and the community often simmered just below the surface. Among the officers patrolling the streets was a man named Greg. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried an air of authority that made people take notice. But beneath his uniform and polished badge lay a man with deep prejudices and a short temper. Greg believed he was untouchable, convinced that his position as a police officer gave him the right to act however he pleased. Over time, his arrogance grew, and so did the number of complaints filed against him. Yet nothing ever seemed to stick. The department always found a way to protect its own, and Greg knew it. On this particular day, the sun blazed down on the Yi Sao city, turning the sidewalks into ovens and making tempers flare even more than usual. Greg sat in his patrol car sipping stale coffee from a paper cup while scanning the streets for trouble. His radio crackled occasionally with updates about minor incidents. Shoplifting here, a noise complaint there, but nothing exciting enough to break the monotony of his shift. That's when he saw them. Two men standing near a bus stop, their voices raised in what appeared to be a heated argument. One of the men was tall and muscular, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as if trying to hold himself back. The other was shorter but had a commanding presence, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie. Greg's instincts kicked in immediately. To him, any kind of public disagreement was a potential threat to order, a disruption he felt duty-bound to. Squash. Without hesitation, he stepped out of his car, slammed the door shut, and marched toward the pair. "Hey, break it up!" he barked, his voice sharp and authoritative. The taller man turned first, his hands flying up in surrender. "We're not doing anything wrong," he said quickly, taking a step back. Greg ignored him, focusing instead on the second man, the one in the hoodie. Something about him rubbed Greg the wrong way. Maybe it was the calmness in his demeanor or the way he didn't flinch under Greg's glare. Whatever it was, it irritated Greg to no end. The man in the hoodie spoke next, his tone measured but firm. "Officer, we were just talking. There's no need to get involved." But Greg wasn't listening. All he saw was a black man standing up to him, refusing to cower like so many others had before. In that moment, his prejudice took over, clouding his judgment completely. He grabbed the man by the collar, yanking him forward. "Talking? You call this talking?" Greg snarled, his face inches away from the man's. "You're disturbing the peace, and I won't tolerate it." The man tried to pull away, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. "Let go of me," he demanded, his voice steady despite the situation. But Greg only tightened his grip. Then, without warning, he pulled back his fist and punched the man squarely in the jaw. The impact sent the man stumbling backward, clutching his face in shock. For a moment, everything went silent. Even the traffic noise seemed to fade into the background. The man staggered slightly, then straightened up, his eyes blazing with fury. What Greg didn't realize, not yet anyway, was that this wasn't just any ordinary citizen. This was Judge Marcus Reed, a highly respected figure in the local court system known for his fairness and dedication to justice. Marcus had been discussing a legal case with his colleague when their conversation became animated. They hadn't meant to draw attention. They were simply passionate about the topic. Now, however, Marcus found himself staring at the officer who had just assaulted him. Pain radiated through his jaw, but it was nothing compared to the sting of betrayal he felt. How could someone sworn to protect and serve behave so recklessly? Taking a deep breath, Marcus locked eyes with Greg. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. Greg smirked, clearly unimpressed. "Should I care?" he shot back, crossing his arms smugly. Marcus nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "I'm Judge Reed," he said, enunciating each word carefully. "And trust me, you'll regret this." At first, Greg dismissed the statement as empty bravado. After all, what could one judge do to him? With a derisive laugh, Greg turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing there, seething with anger and determination. As Greg strode back to his patrol car, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about the encounter had been off. Still, he pushed the thought aside, convincing himself that he had done nothing wrong. Little did he know, the wheels of justice were already beginning to turn. Within minutes, bystanders who had witnessed the altercation started recording videos on their phones. Some approached Marcus asking if he was okay and offering to help. Others uploaded the footage online, where it quickly gained traction. Hashtags like Darn Justice for Reed began trending on social media, drawing attention from news outlets and activists alike. Back at the station, Greg boasted to his colleagues about how he had handled the situation. "Just another troublemaker, thinking he can talk back to a cop," he said with a grin, leaning back in his chair. No one mentioned the growing backlash online, nor did they warn him about the storm brewing outside. By the time Greg realized the magnitude of what he had done, it was too late. Karma, it seemed, worked faster than he could have imagined. What Greg failed to understand was that actions have consequences, especially when those actions are caught on camera and broadcast to the world. As the hours passed, the video of him punching Judge Reed continued to spread, igniting outrage across the city. People demanded answers, calling for accountability and reform. Meanwhile, Marcus wasted no time filing an official complaint against Greg, vowing to see justice served. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, one that would expose the cracks in the system and force everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths. Little did Greg know, his days of walking away scot-free were numbered. Karma doesn't care about badges or egos, and soon enough it would come knocking at his door. The video of Officer Greg punching Judge Marcus Reed spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere: social media platforms, news websites, even local TV stations. The clip showed Greg grabbing Marcus by the collar, shouting aggressively, and then delivering a brutal punch to his face. What made the footage even more shocking was the calm demeanor of Marcus, who didn't resist or provoke Greg in any way. Instead, he simply tried to explain the situation only to be met with violence. As the video gained traction, public outrage grew louder. People from all walks of life weighed in, sharing their thoughts and demanding justice. Some viewers expressed disbelief that a police officer could act so recklessly, while others pointed out that such behavior wasn't uncommon. "This is why we don't trust the police," one commenter wrote beneath the video. Another added, "If this can happen to a judge, what hope do regular people have?" The hashtag Darshan Justice for Reed trended not just locally but nationally, drawing attention from civil rights activists, lawyers, and politicians. Even celebrities joined the conversation, using their platforms to amplify Marcus's story. While the internet buzzed with anger, Judge Reed remained focused. Despite the throbbing pain in his jaw, he went straight to the courthouse after the incident. There, he filed an official complaint against Greg, detailing every moment of the altercation. He also handed over copies of the viral videos as evidence, ensuring there would be no room for denial. Marcus knew this wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message that no one, not even law enforcement, was above the law. But filing a complaint wasn't enough. Marcus understood that systemic issues often required systemic solutions. So, he reached out to influential figures in the community, including civil rights leaders, journalists, and fellow judges. Together, they began organizing a press conference to address the broader implications of the incident. At the same time, Marcus made sure to document everything related to the case, from medical reports proving his injuries to witness statements corroborating his account. Every detail mattered because he knew Greg's supporters would try to discredit him if given the chance. Meanwhile, Greg remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. When he returned to work the next day, he strutted into the precinct like nothing had happened. His colleagues greeted him with awkward silence, avoiding eye contact as he boasted about how he had put a troublemaker in his place. To Greg, the whole thing seemed like a minor inconvenience, a small blip in an otherwise uneventful career. He assumed the department would handle the situation quietly, just as they always did when complaints arose. After all, hadn't they protected him before? Why should this time be any different? Greg's confidence quickly turned to confusion when internal affairs officers arrived at the station later that morning. They called him into a private room, where they began questioning him about the incident. At first, Greg played it cool, sticking to his usual script. He claimed the man, whom he still refused to acknowledge as a judge, had been causing trouble and needed to be taught a lesson. But as the officers pressed him for details, showing him screenshots from the viral video, Greg's bravado started to crack. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Could this really blow up in his face? Back at the courthouse, preparations for the press conference were underway. Marcus stood tall as reporters packed the room, microphones and cameras pointed directly at him. When it was his turn to speak, he took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. "What happened to me yesterday was not just an isolated act of aggression," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "It was a symptom of a much larger problem, one that has plagued our society for far too long." He went on to describe how racial bias and unchecked power within law enforcement continued to harm communities, emphasizing that holding individuals accountable was only the first step toward meaningful change. Marcus's words resonated deeply with those in attendance. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing every sentence. Cameras flashed non-stop as he spoke, ensuring his message reached as many people as possible. By the end of the conference, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't just about Greg punching a judge. It was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed such behavior to persist and demanding action to fix it. By lunchtime, the pressure on the police department became unbearable. Calls poured in from concerned citizens, demanding answers and accountability. Elected officials issued statements condemning Greg's actions, urging the department to take swift action. Protesters gathered outside the precinct, holding signs that read, "No justice, no peace," and chanting slogans like, "Fire Greg." Even some of Greg's own colleagues distanced themselves from him, fearing association with his increasingly toxic reputation. As the day wore on, Greg's world began to unravel. The internal affairs team presented him with mounting evidence against him: witness testimonies, security footage from nearby businesses, and countless social media posts calling for his dismissal. Each piece of evidence chipped away at his defenses, until he had nothing left to hide behind. For the first time in his career, Greg felt powerless. He tried to argue that he had been doing his job, but his explanations sounded hollow even to himself. That evening, as Greg sat alone in his apartment, he scrolled through his phone, watching the endless stream of criticism directed at him. Comments ranged from angry to downright vicious, with strangers dissecting every aspect of his life. Some mocked his appearance, while others called for harsh punishments. It was overwhelming and terrifying. Greg realized, perhaps for the first time, that his actions had consequences. But instead of feeling remorse, he felt resentment. How dare everyone gang up on him? He was just doing what he thought was right. Despite his bitterness, Greg couldn't ignore the reality closing in around him. The department placed him on administrative leave pending further investigation, effectively stripping him of his duties. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to push forward, using the momentum from the press conference to advocate for reforms. He called for mandatory anti-bias training for all officers, stricter oversight mechanisms, and greater transparency in disciplinary proceedings. His efforts inspired others to join the fight, creating a coalition dedicated to addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. For Greg, however, the worst was yet to come. The disciplinary hearing loomed ahead, promising to deliver a verdict that could alter the course of his life forever. As days turned into weeks, the tension between accountability and impunity came to a head. Would justice prevail, or would the system once again shield one of its own? Either way, karma had already begun weaving its intricate web, ensuring that no deed, good or bad, would go unnoticed. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter in this unfolding drama. The city held its breath, waiting to see whether truth and fairness would triumph, or whether old patterns of corruption and complacency would win out. One thing was certain: whatever happened next, it would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. The disciplinary hearing arrived faster than anyone expected. Held in a sterile, windowless room at police headquarters, The atmosphere was tense and charged with emotion. Rows of chairs lined the walls, filled with spectators eager to witness justice or vengeance depending on their perspective. Reporters jotted down notes furiously while cameras captured every movement, their flashes illuminating the room like strobe lights. At the center of it all sat Greg, his usual swagger, replaced by an uneasy slouch. He fidgeted with his tie, avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially Judge Marcus Reed, who presided over the proceedings. Marcus's presence alone commanded respect. Dressed impeccably in a dark suit, he carried himself with quiet authority. His jaw still bore faint bruising from the punch, a visible reminder of the incident that had brought them here. As the hearing began, Marcus wasted no time addressing the gravity of the situation. "This is not just about one officer," he said, his voice firm but measured. "It's about accountability for everyone. If we allow misconduct to go unpunished, we erode trust in the very institutions meant to protect us." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Greg's lawyer tried to paint him as a victim of circumstance, arguing that the altercation had been misunderstood. "My client acted under the assumption that he was dealing with a potential threat," the lawyer stated, gesturing toward Greg. "He didn't know the individual was a judge. This was a split-second decision made in the heat of the moment." But Marcus wasn't swayed. With a calm yet piercing gaze, he interrupted, holding up a tablet displaying the viral video. "Let's be clear," Marcus said, pausing for effect. "There is nothing ambiguous about this footage. Officer Greg escalated the situation unnecessarily. He used excessive force against a civilian, a respected member of the judiciary, who posed no physical threat whatsoever. The evidence presented during the hearing painted a damning picture of Greg's actions. Witness testimonies corroborated Marcus's account, describing how the argument near the bus stop had been peaceful until Greg intervened aggressively. Security camera footage from nearby businesses showed Greg lunging at Marcus without provocation, followed by the sickening impact of his fist connecting with Marcus's face. Even fellow officers called to testify struggled to defend Greg, their answers riddled with hesitation and discomfort. One officer admitted, "I've seen Greg lose his temper before. It's not uncommon." As the hours dragged on, Greg grew increasingly agitated. His lawyer's attempts to downplay the severity of his behavior only made things worse. When asked why he hadn't identified Marcus as a judge earlier, Greg muttered, "How was I supposed to know? He wasn't wearing robes or anything." The comment drew audible gasps from the crowd. To many, it underscored Greg's dismissive attitude, not just toward Marcus, but toward anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of authority. By the time closing arguments began, the outcome seemed inevitable. Marcus delivered a final statement that left no room for ambiguity. Officer Greg's actions were not only illegal, but also emblematic of a larger issue within law enforcement, he declared. They reflect a dangerous mindset. That power equates to impunity. We cannot allow such behavior to persist, lest we risk losing the public's faith entirely. The panel of judges deliberated briefly before announcing their decision. Greg was found guilty of assault and gross misconduct. His badge was confiscated on the spot, and he was sentenced to 6 months in jail, along with mandatory counseling and community service upon release. For Greg, the verdict felt like a gut punch. As officers led him out of the room in handcuffs, he turned to glare at Marcus, his eyes burning with resentment. "You think this is over?" Greg spat, his voice trembling with anger. "You haven't seen the last of me." Marcus met his gaze unflinchingly. "Karma has a way of balancing the scales," he replied coolly. "Consider this a lesson, one I hope you'll remember." Outside the building, chaos erupted as news of the ruling spread. Supporters of Marcus cheered loudly, chanting slogans like "Justice served" and "No more bad cops." Protesters held signs bearing images of Greg's face crossed out with red X's, while others embraced Marcus as he exited the courthouse. "Thank you, Judge Reed," one woman said tearfully. "You've given us hope." Marcus nodded graciously, though his expression remained somber. He knew this victory was only the beginning of a much longer battle. In the days following the hearing, Greg's downfall became a national headline. News outlets dissected the case from every angle, highlighting the systemic issues it exposed. Talk shows debated whether the punishment was harsh enough, while opinion pieces praised Marcus for standing up to injustice. Social media buzzed with memes mocking Greg, turning his name into a cautionary tale. "Greg must go" trended alongside hashtags advocating for police reform, keeping the conversation alive. But the real-world consequences of the ruling hit Greg hard. Stripped of his badge and facing imprisonment, he quickly learned how fragile his sense of identity had been. Friends stopped returning his calls, and neighbors avoided him when he ventured outside. Once released from jail, Greg struggled to rebuild his life. Job applications were rejected almost instantly once employers discovered his criminal record. Interviews ended abruptly when he mentioned his past as a police officer. The same system that had once shielded him now worked against him, leaving him isolated and bitter. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to champion reform efforts, using his platform to push for meaningful change. He partnered with advocacy groups to draft legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement. Public forums allowed citizens to share their experiences with police misconduct, fostering dialogue between communities and officials. Slowly but surely, progress began to take shape. New training programs focused on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity were implemented, while independent oversight committees were established to review complaints against officers. Yet, despite these advancements, Marcus remained acutely aware of the challenges ahead. Change wouldn't happen overnight, and resistance to reform ran deep. Some officers resented the new policies, viewing them as unnecessary restrictions on their work. Others clung to outdated practices, unwilling to adapt. Still, Marcus refused to give up. He believed in the power of persistence, knowing that even small victories could pave the way for bigger ones. Back in Greg's world, karma continued to exact its toll. Unable to find stable employment, he took odd jobs to make ends meet, often working long hours for low pay. His relationships suffered too. Old friends distanced themselves, and romantic prospects dried up. Loneliness gnawed at him, fueling his bitterness. In quieter moments, Greg replayed the events leading up to his arrest, wondering where it all went wrong. Had he misjudged the situation? Could he have handled things differently? These questions haunted him, but he lacked the self-awareness to truly reflect on his mistakes. One evening, while walking home from yet another dead-end job, Greg passed a group of protesters gathered near the precinct. Their signs read familiar: slogans, "Justice for Reed," and "Accountability Now." For a brief moment, Greg considered confronting them, venting his frustrations and blaming them for ruining his life. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the look of determination in their eyes, or the sheer number of people united in their cause. Whatever it was, Greg realized he couldn't fight back, not anymore. Defeated, he lowered his head and hurried past, disappearing into the shadows. As weeks turned into months, the city slowly healed from the turmoil sparked by Greg's actions. Conversations about race, power, and accountability gained momentum, inspiring similar movements in other parts of the country. Marcus watched it all unfold with cautious optimism. He knew there was still much work to be done, but he also saw glimmers of hope, signs that society was finally ready to confront its flaws head-on. And so the story of Officer Greg and Judge Marcus Reed became more than just a cautionary tale. It served as a reminder that justice, though imperfect, is worth fighting for. It proved that even those who wield power must answer for their actions, and that karma, relentless and unforgiving, always finds its mark. Whether through the courts, the court of public opinion, or the quiet reckoning of personal failure, balance would eventually be restored. Because in the end, fairness isn't just a concept, it's a choice, one that requires courage, resilience, and unwavering belief in the possibility of change. Greg's life after the disciplinary hearing spiraled into a downward trajectory that he could never have imagined. Once a figure of authority, respected, or at least feared by many, he now found himself on the fringes of society, struggling to survive. The 6 months he spent in jail were among the hardest of his life. Behind bars, Greg faced hostility not just from other inmates, but also from guards who had heard about his case. They mocked him mercilessly, calling him the cop who punched a judge. Some even went out of their way to make his stay uncomfortable, assigning him to the most menial tasks or ignoring his complaints when tensions flared. When Greg was finally released, he stepped back into a world that felt foreign and unwelcoming. His once imposing stature seemed diminished, his confidence shattered. Without his badge, he no longer commanded respect or fear from anyone. He moved through the city like a ghost, avoiding eye contact with strangers and retreating into himself whenever someone recognized him. The humiliation of being publicly disgraced weighed heavily on him, turning what little pride he had left into bitterness. Finding employment proved nearly impossible. Every job application he submitted was met with rejection. Employers didn't want anything to do with a convicted ex-cop whose name had become synonymous with misconduct. At first, Greg tried to explain himself during interviews, insisting that the incident was blown out of proportion. But his excuses fell flat, and interviewers quickly showed him the door. Eventually, he stopped trying altogether, resigning himself to taking whatever odd jobs he could find. For a man who had once believed himself untouchable, washing dishes in a greasy diner or hauling trash for minimum wage felt like a cruel twist of fate. His personal life suffered just as much. Friends he thought would stand by him distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose reputation had been tarnished beyond repair. Even family members grew distant, embarrassed by the scandal that surrounded him. His younger sister Sarah was one of the few people who still spoke to him regularly, though their conversations were strained. "You brought this on yourself," she told him bluntly during one phone call. "Maybe it's time you owned up to your mistakes instead of blaming everyone else." Her words stung, but deep down, Greg knew she was right, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. Loneliness became Greg's constant companion. Nights stretched endlessly as he lay awake replaying the events that led to his downfall. He couldn't shake the image of Judge Marcus Reed staring at him with calm resolve, nor the sound of the crowd cheering when the verdict was announced. Sometimes he fantasized about confronting Marcus, demanding an apology for ruining his life. Other times he wondered if things might have turned out differently if he had simply walked away from the argument at the bus stop. But these thoughts only led to more frustration, leaving him angrier and more isolated than before. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to thrive, both personally and professionally. His advocacy work gained widespread recognition, earning him invitations to speak at conferences and seminars across the country. Audiences hung on his every word as he shared his story, using it to highlight the urgent need for reform within law enforcement. "Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoers," he often said. "It's about creating systems that prevent wrongdoing in the first place." His message resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to join the fight for change. But Marcus didn't let success go to his head. Despite his growing fame, he remained grounded, focusing on the bigger picture. He worked tirelessly to implement new policies aimed at reducing racial bias and increasing accountability among police officers. Training programs emphasized empathy and de-escalation techniques, teaching officers how to handle conflicts without resorting to violence. Independent oversight committees reviewed complaints against law enforcement, ensuring that investigations were fair and transparent. Slowly but surely, progress began to take root. The reforms weren't universally embraced, however. Some officers resisted the changes, viewing them as unnecessary restrictions on their ability to do their jobs. Complaints poured in about the added paperwork and stricter guidelines, with critics arguing that the measures hindered effective policing. Others dismissed the initiatives altogether, claiming they were merely performative gestures designed to appease activists. Still, Marcus pressed on undeterred by the backlash. He understood that meaningful change required patience and persistence, and that resistance was a natural part of the process. Back in Greg's world, karma continued to exact its toll. One particularly bleak evening, as he trudged home from Another exhausting shift at a warehouse, he noticed a group of protesters gathered near the precinct. Their signs bore familiar slogans: "Justice for Reed" and "Accountability Now." Curiosity, and perhaps a hint of masochism, drew him closer. As he stood on the outskirts of the crowd, listening to impassioned speeches about systemic racism and police brutality, Greg felt a wave of shame wash over him. These were issues he had once dismissed as exaggerated or irrelevant, yet here they were front and center, shaping the national conversation. For a moment, Greg considered joining the protest, hoping to blend in and gain some sense of belonging. But as he took a hesitant step forward, someone spotted him. A young woman pointed him out, shouting, "That's him, that's the racist cop." The crowd turned as one, their eyes locking onto Greg with a mixture of anger and disgust. Panic surged through him as he realized there was nowhere to run. Instead of lashing out or defending himself, Greg did something unexpected. He lowered his head and muttered, "I'm sorry." It was barely audible, but those closest to him heard it. For a brief moment, the tension eased, replaced by murmurs of disbelief. Embarrassed but oddly relieved, Greg slipped away from the scene, disappearing into the night. That small act of contrition marked a turning point for him, not because it absolved him of his sins, but because it forced him to confront the reality of his actions. For the first time, he acknowledged that he had made a grave mistake, one that had hurt not just Marcus but countless others who looked like him. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. As weeks turned into months, Greg began to see glimpses of hope in his otherwise bleak existence. A local church offered free counseling sessions for individuals struggling with guilt and regret. Hesitant but desperate for guidance, Greg attended a session. Sitting in a circle with strangers sharing their struggles, he found solace in the knowledge that he wasn't alone. Slowly, he started to unpack the prejudices and insecurities that had driven his behavior. It was painful work, requiring him to face parts of himself he had long ignored, but it was necessary. In the wider world, Marcus's efforts began to bear fruit. Crime rates dropped in areas where reform measures were implemented, while public trust in law enforcement improved significantly. Communities that had once viewed police with suspicion now welcomed them as partners in creating safer neighborhoods. Stories of successful interventions, officers diffusing tense situations without resorting to force, made headlines, proving the change was possible. Yet Marcus remained vigilant, knowing that complacency was the enemy of progress. He continued to push for greater transparency and accountability, urging lawmakers to hold departments responsible for maintaining high standards. His persistence paid off when several states adopted legislation modeled after his proposals, marking a significant step toward nationwide reform. And so, the paths of Greg and Marcus diverged further, each man grappling with the consequences of their choices. While Greg struggled to rebuild his life, burdened by regret but determined to change, Marcus forged ahead, driven by a vision of justice that transcended individual cases. Together, their stories served as a testament to the power of accountability and the enduring truth that actions, whether good or bad, have far-reaching consequences. Karma, relentless and unforgiving, ensured that balance would eventually be restored, reminding everyone involved that fairness is not just a concept, it's a choice. Months passed, and the ripple effects of Greg's actions and Marcus's response continued to shape the city in profound ways. What had started as a single incident at a bus stop had grown into a movement that touched every corner of society. For Greg, life remained a daily struggle, but small signs of transformation began to emerge. At the church counseling sessions, he started opening up about his past, sharing stories of his childhood and the pressures he faced growing up in a neighborhood where authority figures were often absent or abusive. He spoke candidly about how those experiences shaped his worldview, leading him to idolize power and control without fully understanding their responsibilities. The group listened patiently, offering insights and encouragement rather than judgment. One counselor, a kind-hearted woman named Evelyn, became particularly invested in Greg's journey. She challenged him to reflect on his biases and urged him to take responsibility for his actions, not just for the sake of others, but for his own healing. "You can't change what happened," she told him one evening, her voice gentle yet firm, "but you can decide how it defines you moving forward." Her words struck a chord deep within Greg, planting seeds of self-awareness that slowly began to take root. Inspired by Evelyn's guidance, Greg decided to volunteer at a community center run by activists working to bridge the gap between law, enforcement, and marginalized communities. It was an uncomfortable step for him. Walking into a room full of people who distrusted cops felt like stepping onto thin ice. But he persevered, showing up week after week despite the hostile stares and whispered comments. Over time, his consistency earned him a tentative acceptance. He helped organize workshops on conflict resolution and participated in discussions about systemic racism, listening more than he spoke. Though progress was slow, Greg found himself learning valuable lessons, not just about others, but about himself. Meanwhile, Judge Marcus Reed's influence continued to expand. His advocacy work reached new heights when he was invited to speak at a national conference on criminal justice reform. Standing before an audience of thousands, Marcus delivered a speech that combined passion with pragmatism. "True justice isn't about revenge or retribution," he said, his voice resonating through the auditorium. "It's about creating systems that uplift everyone regardless of race, class, or background. And that starts with accountability, not just for individuals but for institutions." The crowd erupted in applause, many rising to their feet in admiration. Marcus used the platform to highlight successful reforms implemented in his city, emphasizing the importance of collaboration between lawmakers, law enforcement, and community members. He shared data showing improvements in public safety and trust, proving that change was not only possible, but sustainable. His presentation caught the attention of influential policymakers, sparking conversations about replicating similar initiatives nationwide. By the end of the conference, Marcus had secured partnerships with several organizations dedicated to advancing equity and fairness in the legal system. Back home, the impact of these efforts became increasingly visible. Police departments across the region adopted training programs designed by Marcus and his team, focusing on empathy, cultural sensitivity, and de-escalation techniques. Officers who completed the courses reported feeling better equipped to handle challenging situations, while residents noticed a shift in how they were treated during interactions with law enforcement. Stories of officers going above and beyond to assist community members, helping stranded motorists, mentoring at-risk youth, or simply taking the time to listen, began appearing in local news outlets, fostering a renewed sense of hope. Despite these successes, challenges persisted. Not everyone embraced the changes willingly. Some veteran officers grumbled about the softening of policing, claiming that the new policies made their jobs harder. Others resisted attending training sessions, viewing them as unnecessary lectures. Tensions occasionally flared, especially in neighborhoods where mistrust ran deep. Yet, Marcus remained steadfast, reminding skeptics that meaningful change required effort and patience. "We're planting seeds," he often said. "It may take years for them to grow, but the harvest will be worth it." As the months rolled on, Greg's transformation gained momentum. Volunteering at the community center gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He formed unexpected friendships with people from diverse backgrounds, including former adversaries who had once viewed him with suspicion. One such friendship blossomed with Jamal, a young man who had lost his brother to police brutality. Initially wary of Greg, Jamal eventually warmed to him after seeing his genuine desire to make amends. Together, they co-led workshops on restorative justice, teaching participants how to resolve conflicts peacefully and rebuild fractured relationships. Greg also began writing letters of apology to those affected by his behavior as a police officer. It was a daunting task, forcing him to confront painful memories and acknowledge the harm he had caused. Many recipients ignored his attempts at reconciliation, but a few responded with messages of forgiveness, or at least willingness to engage in dialogue. Each positive response fueled Greg's determination to keep pushing forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. In contrast, Marcus faced his own set of challenges. As his profile grew, so did the scrutiny. Critics accused him of being too idealistic, arguing that his proposals were impractical in real-world scenarios. Others dismissed him as a celebrity judge, suggesting that his focus on activism detracted from his judicial duties. Some even launched personal attacks, dredging up old controversies to undermine his credibility. Through it all, Marcus maintained his composure, refusing to let negativity derail his mission. "Criticism comes with the territory," he told a reporter during an interview. "What matters is staying true to your values and doing the work that needs to be done." One day, fate brought Greg and Marcus together again, this time under very different circumstances. Marcus visited the community center where Greg volunteered, invited to speak about the ongoing reforms. When Greg saw him enter the room, his heart sank. Memories of the bus stop altercation flooded back, leaving him paralyzed with anxiety. But instead of avoiding Marcus, Greg approached him hesitantly, extending a hand. "Judge Reed," he said, his voice trembling. I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to do better." Marcus studied Greg for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Greg's surprise, he smiled faintly and shook his hand. "Thank you for saying that," Marcus replied. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step counts. Keep going, you're making a difference." The brief exchange left Greg overwhelmed with emotion, tears welling up in his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for himself, but for the possibility of a brighter future. As the sun set over the city that evening, both men reflected on how far they had come and how much farther they still had to go. Greg returned to the community center, energized by Marcus's words and eager to continue his journey of redemption. Marcus, meanwhile, prepared for another round of meetings with policymakers, determined to push for even greater reforms. Their paths, once intertwined by conflict, now converged toward a shared goal, a world where justice wasn't just an aspiration, but a reality. And so, the story of Officer Greg and Judge Marcus Reed evolved into something larger than either of them, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of accountability. Karma, relentless and inevitable, ensured that every action carried consequences, but also opportunities for growth. Whether through pain or perseverance, both men discovered that change was possible and that the pursuit of fairness was a journey worth taking, no matter how long the road. The final chapter of Greg and Marcus's intertwined stories unfolded over the course of a year, marking both personal transformations and societal shifts. What had begun as a single act of aggression at a bus stop had rippled outward, shaping lives and communities in ways neither man could have predicted. For Greg, the journey was one of redemption, an uphill climb filled with setbacks but also moments of grace. For Marcus, it was about leadership and legacy, ensuring that the changes he fought for would endure long after he was gone. Greg's transformation reached new heights when he decided to pursue a certificate program in conflict resolution and restorative justice. It wasn't an easy decision. The thought of returning to school terrified him, especially given his lack of formal education beyond high school. But something inside him, a spark ignited by Evelyn's encouragement and Jamal's friendship, urged him to take the leap. He enrolled in night classes, juggling coursework with his odd jobs and volunteer work at the community center. The first few weeks were grueling, forcing him to confront insecurities he'd buried for years. Yet with each passing month he grew more confident, finding joy in learning and connecting with classmates from diverse backgrounds. One evening, during a group project on systemic racism, Greg shared his story openly for the first time in an academic setting. His voice trembled as he recounted the events leading up to the infamous punch, admitting how his prejudice and arrogance had blinded him to the humanity of others. When he finished speaking, the room fell silent, not out of judgment, but out of respect. A classmate broke the quiet by saying, "Thank you for being brave enough to share that. Your honesty helps us all grow." Those words stayed with Greg, reinforcing his belief that vulnerability could be a source of strength. As graduation approached, Greg faced another daunting challenge, delivering a speech at the ceremony. Nervous but determined, he poured his heart into writing a message that reflected his growth and gratitude. On the big day, standing before an audience of proud graduates and their families, Greg took a deep breath and began. "I used to think power meant control," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of emotion. "But I've learned that true power comes from accountability, from owning your mistakes and working to make things right. To everyone here today, remember this. No matter where you come from or what you've done, it's never too late to change." His speech received a standing ovation, bringing tears to the eyes of many, including Evelyn and Jamal, who cheered louder than anyone else. That moment marked a turning point for Greg, solidifying his place not just as a changed individual, but as someone capable of inspiring others. After graduation, he secured a position as a mediator at the same community center where he'd volunteered, using his skills to help resolve disputes between neighbors, businesses, and even law enforcement agencies. Though the pay was modest, the fulfillment he felt was immeasurable. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to champion reform efforts, expanding his reach beyond local boundaries. His advocacy caught the attention of national leaders, including members of Congress who invited him to testify before committees focused on criminal justice reform. During one historic session, Marcus delivered a powerful testimony that resonated across the country. "We must move away from punitive systems that perpetuate cycles of harm," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Instead, we should invest in solutions that prioritize healing, equity, and accountability. Justice isn't a zero-sum game. It benefits us all." Marcus's words galvanized lawmakers, resulting in the passage of landmark legislation aimed at addressing systemic issues within policing and the judicial system. The bill included provisions for increased funding for community-based programs, mandatory anti-bias training for officers, and independent oversight boards to review misconduct cases. While implementation varied by region, the symbolic victory sent shockwaves through society, signaling a commitment to lasting change. Back home, Marcus celebrated these achievements while remaining grounded in the everyday realities of his courtroom. He understood that laws alone couldn't dismantle centuries of inequality. Cultural attitudes needed to shift as well. To that end, he launched a mentorship program pairing young people from underserved communities with professionals in fields like law, education, and healthcare. Many participants credited the initiative with opening doors they never thought possible, calling Marcus a guiding light in their lives. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Resistance to reform remained strong in certain quarters, with critics arguing that the new policies undermined law enforcement's effectiveness. Some departments struggled to adapt while others outright refused to comply. Tensions occasionally boiled over, sparking protests and counter-protests that divided cities once again. Yet, Marcus refused to lose sight of the bigger picture. "Change is messy," he reminded supporters during a town hall meeting. "But giving up is not an option. We owe it to future generations to keep fighting." Greg, now a respected figure in his own right, joined Marcus at several of these events, sharing his story to emphasize the importance of second chances and accountability. Their partnership drew widespread attention, symbolizing the potential for reconciliation even in the face of deep-seated divisions. Together, they co-authored an op-ed published in a major newspaper, urging readers to embrace empathy and collaboration as tools for building stronger, fairer communities. By the end of the year, the city had undergone remarkable changes. Crime rates continued to decline, while public trust in law enforcement reached levels not seen in decades. Community centers thrived, offering resources and support to those in need. Schools implemented curricula focused on diversity and inclusion, preparing students to navigate a complex world. And though scars from past injustices still lingered, there was a palpable sense of hope, a belief that better days lay ahead. For Greg, the culmination of his journey came when he received a letter from Judge Reed himself. In it, Marcus expressed pride in how far Greg had come, acknowledging the courage it took to confront his demons and rebuild his life. "You've proven that redemption is possible," Marcus wrote. "Keep shining your light. It matters more than you know." Reading those words brought tears to Greg's eyes, reminding him of how far he'd traveled since that fateful day at the bus stop. As the calendar turned to a new year, both men reflected on the lessons they'd learned. Greg realized that true freedom came not from wielding power but from serving others. Marcus understood that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating opportunities for healing and growth. Though their paths had diverged dramatically, their shared commitment to fairness united them in purpose. Karma, relentless and inevitable, had struck swiftly and profoundly. It had punished Greg for his hubris and rewarded Marcus for his resilience. But more importantly, it had shown them both that actions carry consequences and every choice presents an opportunity for change. Whether through pain or perseverance, they had discovered that the pursuit of justice was a journey worth taking, no matter how long the road. And so, the story of Officer Greg and Judge Marcus Reed became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge. Through accountability, empathy, and determination, they proved that fairness isn't just a concept, it's a choice. One that, when embraced collectively, has the power to transform not just individuals, but entire societies.